Oh, Dr. Carrie Odermann is now live with me to touch on the US-UK tension over the use of military bases. She's a global affairs expert. Good to have you, this weekend. Now, is a lot happening. First off, let's start with the military, the use of military bases. This war has, signaled or made us understand the significance of the use of military bases.
Yeah, it's a really important thing to understand, especially when we're looking at what the position of the UK. We are seeing that they've allowed the United States to use Fairford and their base in the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia, but they're also using one of their bases, or actually two of their bases in Cyprus. These bases are all considered sovereign territory of the UK, meaning that they can decide over them. And I think one of the points that is really being glossed over is why the United States is leaning on the UK to use their bases. Just recently, Spain has said that they will not be allowing the US to use any of their bases. And I think this might be a situation where, although the United States is really the dominant power globally right now, that they might not want to test that power in Germany or France by trying to use bases to launch strikes that some consider illegal in international law.
So now, interesting you brought in international law. We'll look at that shortly. But how does Starmer's decision to allow U.S. use of British bases for defensive strikes on Iran reconcile with Trump's claim that the UK is joining the war after it's been won? And does Starmer's initial refusal demonstrate weakness on his part? Because a lot of people are saying he needs to grow a spine.
Well, I think that, first of all, Trump's approach to Starmer echoes what he said in January in Davos when he criticized other allies, saying that NATO allies only joined the United States after the hardest fighting was over and stood in the back. This caused a huge backlash among allies and was heavily criticized and described as outrageous and disrespectful. Over 400 British soldiers also died, supported the United States, and the only time Article 5 had ever been activated after the World Trade Centers were attacked in the United States. So Starmer changing his mind doesn't necessarily show weakness. Starmer had limited information. You have to remember that the US Congress did not even know that on February 28th, these strikes were going to happen. So within 48 hours, with the information he had, and that's barely enough time to actually get legal advice, and I don't think he did get sound legal advice on whether or not he should allow the United States to do this, but in less than 48 hours, he did change his mind. But we can't forget that the Gulf region has hundreds of thousands of British citizens living, especially concentrated in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. So there is a reason for Starmer to be concerned and want to support defensive actions. But that's really the crux of the situation. Is it defensive?
So now, quickly, Dr. Carrie, how does the UK's decision to allow the use of its bases for defensive strikes on Iran reconcile with its obligations under international law, particularly Article 2 of the United Nations Charter?
I don't think it reconciles with it at all. What we're witnessing here firsthand is the weakening of international law, and we're looking at it being weakened in three ways. You have the stretching of the interpretation of Article 2, Paragraph 4. Then you have allies helping like the UK, helping normalize this rule bending. And then it becomes even more and more clear. The third point is that realistic enforcement of international law against a major power is almost impossible. But you've got to ask yourself what's going to be filling this void in creating international norms. And the United States may end up regretting having weakened international law, because what comes next is actually something that the United States does not have superiority in, and that's the weaponization of interdependence. And if you look at how the European Union has enormous leverage over the United States when it talking about market access or regulatory power, or China and supply chains. And I mean, Japan is one of the largest foreign holders of US treasuries. So if we're not going to use international law anymore to control norms, there are other ways to create norms. And there, the United States does not have the most power.
Very important key point you raised there. Now, quickly, because of time, does the UK's approval of US use of its bases for strikes on Iran, Iranian missile capabilities constitute complicity in an act of aggression? And what are the implications for UK's sovereignty as well?
Well, I think that the UK might find itself in a similar situation to Belarus, because is it really that much different? Russia used Belarus as a staging ground to attack Ukraine in 2022 as part of the full-scale invasion, and that was against international law. The UK might go into this situation with the best intentions, but the way modern warfare works is that a pilot leaving to do something defensive from a UK base can quickly have his orders changed as the situation changed, and a defensive action to shoot down something akin to a Patriot missile battery can then change to cutting down radars or striking something else, which would then be considered offensive. And the UK has no way of monitoring that. It's basically, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back in.
Right. So can the UK effectively monitor and ensure that the US use of its bases remains limited to defensive purposes, given the blurred lines between defensive and offensive operations in modern warfare?
If we look at sovereignty and control and really who has a say in the situation, this reminds me a little bit of the situation that happened in Nigeria on December 25th. Did President Tinubu really have power to tell the United States no when they launched the missile attacks on the Sokoto region? Does the UK really have the power to stop the US from using its bases if they have equipment and soldiers there? So this isn't only a theoretical question, it's also a political question, and it shows the strengths and weaknesses and how far the United States is willing to go against international law and the current norms.
Right. So what are the implications for UK-US relations if the US uses British bases for strikes that are deemed unlawful under international law? And does the UK's distinction between offensive and defensive operations hold up to scrutiny, given that strikes on Iranian missiles capabilities could be seen as part of a broader campaign to degrade Iran's military potential?
I don't think there's any way of telling if something is offensive or defensive right now. Most experts of international law think that these strikes by Israel and the United States are against international law. It seems irrelevant to the United States and Israel. And if it is relevant to the UK, they're the ones that are going to have to deal with the reputational risk. And you need to understand that the UK does not alone have the leverage that the European Union does. And their choice to leave the European Union means the UK is standing alone. This might be a calculated risk on the side of Keir Starmer, hoping to ally himself closer with the United States, but he'll also have domestic backlash. He is really sitting between two chairs right now, and he has he's pulled in different directions domestically and internationally. It's a tough position to be in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Carrie Odermann, for joining us. She is a global affairs expert and a political scientist. Had to touch on a major story today, which is Trump blasting Keir Starmer.